Hey everybody, Chef Chad Armstrong here, and welcome to today's video lesson on knife skills. You know, the knife is by far the most important tool you're going to need and use in your kitchen. Once you become proficient with a knife, you'll find that it opens things up so much easier for you to where things run a lot smoother in your kitchen. You know, I used to tell my culinary students, go home, buy a bag of onions or carrots or potatoes or whatever, and cut them all the exact same size, the same dice, the same slice, whatever it might be, just so you can become proficient. You know, repetition, repetition, repetition. The more you do things, the more comfortable you become with it and the better you become at that skill. You know, you don't have to go out and throw those away, but you can definitely use them in, you know, a dish or use them for stock or whatever it may be. Use it for something, but it's great to go ahead and just practice, 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 practice. I can't emphasize that enough. You know, the great scene in the Julia Child movie where, you know, she's cutting and she has a big pile of onions and her husband comes in and she's crying, but she had just accomplished and practiced cutting all those onions so she become better in it. You know, we can all take a little bit, I think, from Julia and how she ran her kitchen and what she did with mastering that skill. So today I want to go ahead and take you through several different, you know, vegetables and show you different knife cuts. You know, there's also an attachment below that you can download that I've listed all of the different knife cuts that are out there that you can use as a reference for yourself. You know, knife cuts are extremely important because when you're cooking, it's always important to make sure that your food is the same size roughly, as much as you can get it. So that way it cooks evenly, depending on what it is. You know, you always want to cut your carrots and onions and celery. You want to have them pretty close to the same size. So that way when I'm making a sauce, one's not going to cook way before the other and then it's going to become mushy or for a dish or whatever it may be for. But it's extremely important that they are all the same size. So I'm going to show you today several different vegetables and knife cuts on these vegetables. It's not all of them, but it's at least a start for you to get, you know, started with repetition. You know, practice, practice, practice. So let's go ahead and get started on this, and I'll see you at the cutting board. All right, before we get started cutting, I want to go over a couple just, you know, important things you need to know about knife safety and about using a knife properly and holding a knife properly. You know, I've got here in front of me, I've got my 8-inch chef's knife. You know, my comfortable way to hold a knife is to grab it by the handle with my forefinger and my thumb holding the back end of the handle or the blade itself. So I've got my thumb and my forefinger on either side of it, and then my other 3 fingers wrap around on the back side. And the reason I do that is because that is a really stable position to hold my knife in. You see people holding it back here, or if you hold it like this, that tends to rock a lot. So when you're cutting and you're pushing down and you're chopping, you're not very stable in that position. So make sure you get a good grip on your knife, the thumb and the forefinger on the actual blade, the back of the blade itself. So right, and then the other fingers just wrap around. We have another nice stable, you know, position for my knife. You know, another thing you want to look at with round objects, you know, peppers or onions, anything that's a circular object is dangerous to cut. You know, when you're trying to cut it, it's wanting to move on you. So you want to get it to a point where it is flat as possible in the shortest amount of time. So like this pepper, most people cut the pepper in half, but then I've got 2 globes that are still going to be rocking back and forth. It also, you know, all the seeds fall out of the pepper and you've got a big mess of seeds. So why not take and cut that just down the side. All the seeds stay attached to on the inside of the core, and I've got a relatively flat piece to work with now. The other thing you want to do with your fingers, you know, I'm right-handed, so I'm holding my knife with my right hand. My left hand is you know, kind of exposed a little bit. You gotta be careful not to get the tip of your finger. Always, always, always have your fingers curled, and I'll show you on the board. That way I've got this flat spot to work with against my fingers here. If I'm cutting up and down, and my fingers tips aren't exposed to where I'm going to, you know, whack one of my tips off. You definitely don't, you know, want to make sure that you keep those fingertips like that. Think of like an eagle talon. It's kind of weird to say, but you know, think of an eagle talon and hold their claws for grabbing. You can use your fingers to hold with the tips curled back, and I've got a flat spot to work on with my knife here. So I'm not, you know, there's nothing that's going to be exposed that can cut on my finger. I also keep a bucket for compost next to me as well, just for efficiency in the kitchen. You know, you're always wondering about, you know, what can I do to improve proficiency? What can I do to make things go faster? Having a bucket where I can just dump things as I cut right next to me is definitely a helpful tool. So I'm taking all 4 sides off this pepper, and if I want I can take the bottom off because that's definitely edible and usable as well. And then I'm left with all the seeds are intact to the core, the stem, and the parts that I don't need go into my compost bucket. Now I've got 4 nicely, flat, mostly flat pieces here that I can now work with. Okay, so let's start with one. I want to go over a knife cut, and I'm going to start with one that's a little bit easier. It's a large dice, and a large dice is roughly 3/4 of an inch cubed. So to start off first, I'm going to take, and it's really important to make sure that you get comfortable in your stance too. So I'm going to back up a little bit. When you're standing and you're working, you don't want to be hunched over. You don't want to be rigid and tight. You want to be, you're comfortable. Just your knees are bent a little bit. You're bouncing to where you're not straightening your lower back. You're not hurting your arms. Your shoulders aren't wearing out, because if you're doing a lot of chopping or a lot of cutting, those things will wear down really fast. So make sure you have a good, comfortable stance. Bring the food back to you. And all I'm going to do is find my, roughly 3/4. It doesn't have to be, this isn't rocket science. It doesn't have to be exactly 3/4 of an inch, unless you're maybe a professional student and that's how they drill it. But it really just needs to be as close to the same size as possible. So I'm going to take my knife, holding my firm grip here, my fingers curled back, and my left hand is holding the pepper in place. And I'm going to take and just slide that knife forward and just slide it through. So now I've got one. I will do the same one with the other side. So now I've got these 3 pieces here, 3 pepper strips, all relatively the same width. Very simply, all you have to do is just turn it to the side and do the exact same thing, and just working down as you go. So now I've got my side of my pepper already cut into a large slice, all relatively the same size. I can use that for whatever I want to now. And all you do is just go through the rest of these. If you want, you could always come through, if you wanted to make it a little flatter, you could always take out that little membrane that's a little bitter and straighten it up a little bit. All things that are going to go into the compost. And you do the same thing. Turn, so that way all the pieces that I just sliced, now I'm going to come through and do the same thing, and you'll get faster at it. You don't have to do all these at once. And it just becomes, you become quicker. And if you have one that's a straggler that falls apart, you take it to the side and you do the same thing. So that's how you do a pepper. Make sure you take the sides off, the 4 sides. Stop going through the middle of the pepper. You really want to start to where you're using the outside of it and then the bottom of it, and that way your seeds are left with the core that you can then compost. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next vegetable. All right, so now I've got a piece of celery that I'm going to take and break down into a smaller dice as well. So the main thing with celery though is it's got that half moon or quarter moon shape to it. How do you get it broken down? Well, let's go through that. So let's go over to the cutting board. The first thing I want to do is I want to cut this down into a little bit more manageable length. So I cut that into 3s. They're all roughly the same size there. So now if I start with this guy, I'm going to take and cut it right in half. And once I have it in half, then you can see it wants to lay a little bit flatter for me. So then I can come along and cut those guys into more manageable lengths. Once again, all I do is just turn it, and then just a rocking motion. Knife never comes off the board. I'm moving the celery with my fingers, and now I've got a nice little pile of small dice celery that I can now use for my sauce or whatever side dish I may need that for. Let's do that one more time on the other side. Same thing, holding the celery with my fingers, the talon claws, through 3 times. So now I've got 3 pieces there, 3 sticks. Now I'm going to take the same thing, just letting the knife run through it. And I'm not pressing down, straight down. my knife is actually sliding forward. You want your knife to be able to work. You want it to be able to cut and do what it's supposed to do. Perfect. So now I've got all roughly the same size. Really simple, really easy. Definitely practice that. Uses, great for, using for sauces or for garnish on your dishes. So let's go ahead and move on to the next item. All right, so now I've got a carrot, and with the carrot, I'm actually going to do what's called an oblique cut. Now this is a great for when you're going to roast carrots or if you're going to glaze carrots and you want to serve them as is so that they're all roughly the same size, but it still has a nice eye appeal. Eye appeal is also one of the many factors that you can use in cooking that helps enhance the dish for your family, your friends, whoever you're cooking for. So a roll cut or an oblique cut, all you do is hold my knife at a 45-degree angle. If you can see it on the camera here, I've got it on the board. I just go 45 degrees over. I bring my knife in. I'm holding it, the eagle talon claws back here, and I come in and do a cut. Now, once I do that cut, I'm going to take and not move my knife, but I'm going to roll the carrot 90 degrees. So by rolling it 90 degrees, I've got this part exposed back here at a different angle, roughly the same size, slice through. Once again, roll the carrot 90 degrees, and you can see I'm rolling it towards you there on the video. Slice through, roll 90 degrees, slice through, roll 90 degrees, and then, well, I want to stop up and back up for a second. The tip of the carrot is relatively thin. As I go and work back on the carrot, it gets thicker. So these are a little bit longer than what I'm going to do back here. I'm going to actually start making these shorter as I get to the back end of the carrot, and that way they're all going to be roughly the same size and they cook at roughly the same time. So all I'm doing is just slicing through after I roll it. So roll the carrot, 45-degree angle, cut. Roll the carrot 90 degrees, 45-degree angle, cut, and so on and so on. So I want to move all the way through this carrot. By now, I'm really trying to make these all roughly close to the same size. I'm just not going back as far on the carrot because I want them to be pretty close in size. What this does is this gives you, like I said, an eye appeal. They're all going to be roughly the same size, so they're all going to cook roughly the same time, and it looks great on a plate. So that's what's called an oblique cut. It's one that I use all the time. My kids love it. When I do glazed carrots, I roast, vegetables, root vegetables like carrots or parsnips. Fantastic cut for those. So let's go ahead and move on to the next cut. All right, so on the next cut, I'm actually going to show you how to do what's called a chiffonade. And all a chiffonade is, it just means ribbon in French. So chiffonade is great for using with flat herbs or with big hearty greens or spinach, something that is feathery or long and that you need to cut down into relatively the same size pieces without having to go through the process of doing dices or slices on a green. So greens are one of my family's favorites. We go through a lot of greens. This is actually part of this is actually chard. The only thing with chard I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take this stem out. So all you do is just take your knife and cut down on either side of it on the cutting board, and you could do several of these at a time. You don't have to do it, or you can even do it by hand. I just like to use the knife. The stem, don't throw that away. I love using this. Saute it with some garlic. Fantastic flavor in the stem. You don't have to get rid of that, but I am going to be using just the green part in today's application to show you how to do a chiffonade. So now I'm going to take those two pieces, and you can do several at a time. If you're doing a whole bunch of greens or spinach or basil or whatever it may be, do a bunch of them. And all you're going to do is just roll them together like so. And then working down, I'm going to cut ribbons. And these are going to be great to use for sautés or stuffings inside of different vegetables or inside of different meats. And all I'm doing is just backing up as I go so that they're all roughly the same size. Now I come through, I can pull them apart, and now I've got my chiffonade. So really, Great technique for using for flat leafy vegetables, greens, basil, herbs, stuff like that. Just remember to go ahead and pick it off first, pick the stems out, roll them up together, and then you can do them as thin or as thick as you want. Cut them into your ribbons. Okay, hopefully that one helps. Let's go ahead and move on to the next tip. All right, so now I've got one of my favorites, garlic. Garlic is one that I use in a lot of dishes, as well as I'm sure most of you do too. You don't want to go out there, you don't want to buy the jarred garlic, the pressed garlic. You don't want to buy that stuff. That stuff's been sitting around for so long, and it loses so much value by doing that. You want to go ahead and when you buy garlic, buy a nice, really tight bulb where the skin is really tight on the garlic. It's not browning, it's not discoloring, it's not coming, the cloves aren't coming out of the bulb. Make sure you buy really nice fresh garlic from the store or from your local farmer. So with garlic, the main challenge for people is, how do I peel it? Well, really simple. All you do is I've got my clove here that I've already taken off of the bulb. Take my knife, lay my knife flat on it with the base of my hand, and I just give it a little whack. So now all that skin just comes right off of my garlic, and I've got my clove ready to go. Let's do another one. So same thing, base of my hand, just to break that down and make it that much easier to get that skin off of your garlic. And then you could take, if you want, and all I'm gonna do is the Eagle Talon, these are much smaller to work with my knife right up against my fingers, and I'll do it slow, but you'll get much faster at this, is really just, all I'm doing is working my knife back as I work my fingers back on that bulb. So I have nice even pieces of garlic minus the end there. I can come back. That way I don't have that little, the core. And I've got my garlic right there. If I want to chop down farther, I can obviously run my knife through it and cut it down a little bit farther. So now I'll just do a little bit faster so you can get proficient with it. And you can see how much easier it gets the more you do it and get used to your knife. All my slices are all the same size, nice even garlic, and I've got my core there that I can then compost. Okay, so that's garlic. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section. All right, so now that everybody's hands smell like garlic and I've got you really primed to get you nice and smelly, let's go ahead and move on to the onion. Onions are probably the most widely used vegetable in my kitchen, if not maybe your kitchen and a lot of kitchens around the world. Onions are very versatile, bring a nice flavor to your dish, and you can use them in several different applications for flavoring to being a main component of a soup or a dish. So you really want to know how to master an onion, and once again, onions, they're round, so they're dangerous. They want to roll around on your cutting board. So what's really the safest way, and that's really to get it in half and get it flat as fast as possible, in as few steps as possible. So a couple of things to know about an onion. This is what I refer to as the North Pole. This is what grows up out of the ground. This would be the South Pole or the root end. So when you say, cut it, on the equator, you're going to cut it in half through the equator, not through the poles themselves. So I like to use the core is really a helpful piece of an onion to help hold it together. Onion has all these different layers, and they're held together. They all work together with that core. If you cut that core out all the way, then your onion's going to want to fall apart. So make sure you leave that core intact when you cut an onion. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and cut as close to possible. And now you can see there's the core. I went through the root. The root's gone. That's going into the compost. Cut through the top a little bit, get rid of that. And then I'm just going to take my knife, my onions on the table. I'm not really holding this because I don't want it wobbling around too much on me. I'm just going to run my knife through that first layer of peel, and then we're going to get rid of that. That needs to go into the compost. Just peel that outer layer off. And sometimes they're wanting to stick a little bit more than others. Not a big deal. Just take your time, make sure you get all the peel off of that first layer, and then make sure that you clean your board, because now you've got all that dirt that was on the onion that is now on your board. So I'm going to take my sanitation rag and just wipe that off into my compost as well. Wipe my knife off. And I've got a clean board to work with. Okay. So now to get this to a flatter, more safe spot, I'm going to take and cut right down through the center of that core from one pole to the next. Now I've got two halves, and you can see the core is intact, and you can really see the layers now inside of that. So I want to show you actually two different cuts on this onion. I'm going to do one, a dice on one side, and then the other side I'm going to do what's called a bâtonnet cut, or more like a thin slice to use in other applications. So let's use the dice first. With my core away from me, you know, pointing towards the camera there, I'm going to take and I'm going to cut. You know, I've got my Eagle Talons working. I don't want to cut all the way through the onion. If I cut all the way through, then pieces start falling out the side. So all I'm going to do is take, working down, straight down and out, and then work over a little bit without going through the onion. All I'm doing is straight down. So you can see that the onion will still hold intact. It won't come apart on us. So now you can just show you on the camera, you know, it still is holding together. Then I'm going to turn my onion so that the top part, the north pole, is to my right. I'm going to pull it back towards the back of the cutting board because I want to be able to get my knife into it. And I'm going to take and run that knife fingers on top. I can't emphasize this enough. I want to show you fingers on top of this. If you get to where your pinky or your thumb is on the board and you're cutting through and that knife goes through, it's going to hit those fingers. So you want to make sure your fingers are on top. I'll show you on the camera there, on top of the board. So I'm going to cut this through, just work through, hold it together. And if pieces want to kick out to the side, that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And once again, I didn't go all the way through the onion. I'm just working through the back. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to come up a little bit and do the same thing. Just working my knife through. And now I've got it coming apart in several different ways, both horizontally and vertically. You know, pieces of onions fall off. It's round, it's got layers. That is totally fine. Now with my onion in the same way, now I'm going to hold everything intact, and I'm going to take my knife and just work it across that first cut. That way I have my dice. You see, I'm just sliding the knife through away from me, and you can see now they're roughly all coming apart the same size, the same way, the same fashion. And you've got a really nice even dice on your onion. Now when you get to the back and wants to come apart, you can just lay it flat like so and do the same thing. So that way you're still working in a relatively safe position. So now I've got all this dice in here, all roughly the same size, and it's a nice, perfect, even dice. Okay? So let's push that to the side, and then I want to show you how to do a bâtonnet cut. And this is all, like I said, really great practice, really get you trained for what the onion does to your eyes, so you're not, you know, crying anymore. All right. So now with doing a bâtonnet cut, I do need to take the core out. I don't want that core in there because if I do a bâtonnet cut, the core is going to hold it together. So I'm going to take and just cut a little bit of that off, so that way the core is now gone. And now with the onion away from me, I've got, you know, the two ends, the North Pole and the South Pole, and my knife at a 45-degree angle working on the side. I'm going to cut about a 1/4 inch slice of that onion. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to work my knife over about a 1/4 inch and down and cut through. So what that's doing is cutting more even slices. And now as I work up the onion, I'm going to decrease the angle of my knife, so by the time I get to the top of the onion up here, my knife should be at a straight angle. And I'll turn it that way so you can see, at a straight angle right on the top of the onion. So let's go ahead and continue, like I said, decreasing as I get to the top. So now that last one at the very top, my knife is straight up and down. And when I get to that point at the very top of the onion, I'm going to turn my onion over. So you can see all I'm doing is just flipping it this way and repeat the 45-degree angle. And working back to that angle of straight up to the top. Straight up and down again, I get to the last cut. Now I've got lost a little onion on the floor, that's all right. Now I've got all my roughly bâtonnet cuts. They're all roughly a 1/4 inch width. That way I can do, French onion soup, or I can, saute some onions for burgers, or whatever it may be, just to make it that much simpler. So now you can see what that is and what cut that is. All right. All right, very good. So let's go ahead and let's continue moving on. All right, so I hope today's video tutorial helped. It was really meant to be just an overview to get you started, to kind of give you some insight into what to expect over the next six months with Home Cook Academy. This is by far not all of the vegetables or all the knife cuts we'll be going through. We'll be going through more of them as we get deeper into the program, but I wanted to just get you started, get you something that you can practice on before, lesson one, happens to come out. But, just to give you, something to get going with. So I really encourage you to practice. Like I said earlier, repetition, repetition, repetition. You can't, beat it. Just always remember, a couple things. Holding the knife properly, the eagle talon, the eagle claw, and the curled tips. Having a compost bucket is fantastic. Just something to give you another leg up in the kitchen to make things quicker for you. So not always having to run to the trash or the sink to dump scraps or compost. So look forward to the next video. Check out the other bonus lessons. Can't wait to get started with you here in lesson one. It's gonna be fantastic. We're gonna hit the ground running. And until next time,